I'm Kathy Johnson. Welcome to Town Talk. I have my guest with me today and if you'll bear with me, I need my glasses. Let's see. My guest today is Len Yannielli. Welcome, Len. Welcome
Thank you,
very
Kathy.
much. Len Yannielli is Professor Emeritus, Naugatuck Valley Community College in Waterbury, Connecticut. He was also an associate in research at Yale University. He has done molecular research as well as published research in forest ecology. He was the former president and chair of the board of the Litchfield Hills Audubon Society in Connecticut. In 2007, the Greater Waterbury United Way the Greater United Way and Connecticut General State Assembly recognized his community contributions. In 2009, the National Association of Biology Teachers, the American Institute of Biological Sciences, and the Biological Sciences Curriculum Studies awarded him the National Educator of the Year honors. Len has written 4 books. His book, Lyme Disease, was published in 2004 by Chauncey House Publishers. His memoir, Moon Shadow of War, was published in 2013. When asked why he writes, his response was, "I like to share with readers in the Epicurean delight in the search for causation. I write to entertain and meaningfully engage the reader." Today he will address his latest book, Down Gunntown, 2015, about saving passive open space and speak to other related aspects of the environment. And I must say, I enjoyed your book, Len, and I must say you're a superb writer. I could only hope someday that I could achieve that. So I would say that the book was it was a page turner for me. I read it very quickly. And would you like to say something about your book that you want the audience to know before we start talking?
Sure. I think we're going to talk about 2 true events in history here. But the colonial one, I want to emphasize, is the most important event in the history of Naugatuck, probably in the Naugatuck Valley. And I say that because not only the events in 1780, which we're going to discuss, but those events and the impact of it arc and connect to the new millennium and make it one continuous narrative where it actually, the historical memory of these colonial events right here in Naugatuck and Oxford and in Derby actually helped save land on the west side of Naugatuck that it is still called the Guntown neighborhood. Lots of times people hear the word hurry down Guntown, it sounds like the wild, wild west.
Yes, that's what I thought.
Right, but it's really the wild, wild east.
The wild west.
Right, and it was really a rallying cry in the colonial period to hurry down into Guntown for reasons which we'll talk about in detail. And it also became a rallying cry in the end of the 20th century into the new millennium to get down to the Guntown area of Naugatuck to help save the passive open space there. That is, passive open space being land with no impervious surfaces, no hard surfaces.
Right. And this was, I know you made this your mission for many years, but I want to talk about the fact that you start out in colonial times and that in the lower Naugatuck Valley, which encompassed Derby, Waterbury, and Naugatuck and thereabouts, had a lot of colonial history to it.
Sure.
Amazing to me.
Sure, yeah. The story really is about the sloughing off of the imperial powers in Europe and stop being impacted by them. It was a lot about new ways of governing from the grassroots participation, forming a republic, which was a very new idea back then, opening the door to democracy. And very specifically here, it was about this secret British agent. And we're not talking about James Bond now.
Okay.
This is 1780, making his way up the Naugatuck Valley. We're going to talk about him, and it's about a young colonial boy who gets kidnapped. The family's frantic to get him back. They would be in the Naugatuck area now. Back then it was called different names.
That was a true story, by the way, The Stolen Boy.
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Both these are true stories. That's a very important point. We could talk more about that.
Yes.
That's really an important point because there are stories about even the colonial period. April Morning by Howard Fast is an example, where he does true events that happened up in Concord and Lexington, those very important events up there, but the characters are fictitious. That's not the case with Hurry Down Guntown. I mean, not only is the place, the events, the issues, the environment, all that true, but the characters are real. I mean, this really did happen. And it goes on and includes the rebel trackers that come down out of Bethany and into Naugatuck, picking up support along the way, even in Derby, where you're from.
Right.
And trying to track down this British agent and the Tory gang that he's leading.
Well, it's amazing because we hear about Lexington and Concord and the shot heard round the world,
Right.
but we don't hear about the shot that was heard right in Connecticut.
Right.
How Connecticut play a lot of history in Connecticut and in and around the lower Naugatuck Valley.
Right, right. I mean, didn't you always wonder, as we went through our own education, besides Jefferson and Adams and Washington and Franklin, as important as they were, what went on here? How did Connecticut manage to stay not occupied by the British when right across Long Island Sound, Long Island was occupied by the British, New York was occupied by the British, yet we stayed clear of that. But certainly we had problems, and this story brings that forward. Last thing I want to mention before going into any detail, it's also about a slave.
Yes.
A slave right here in Oxford. How many people realize there were slaves in Oxford?
Yes, and I read your book, Tobiah.
Tobiah, right.
Yes.
It was a slave right here in
Right
Oxford.
in Oxford.
Right. A lot of people don't realize in doing this research in 1774, I found out there were 6,500 slaves in Connecticut.
Wow.
I mean, a lot of people think they were just house slaves. That was not the case. In the research I was able to do, I found out there were 34 slaves in the greater Waterbury area. Some of them were house slaves. But as you go into the southern part of Connecticut, just 5 years ago, they found out there was a plantation on the southeastern corner of Connecticut. So it was a bigger issue than we would have realized. We tend to think slavery, Virginia, the Carolinas.
That's right. You never think of it up north.
Correct. Right. So, and that's very much involved in the story. And I hope we get to the point to talk about how the state of Connecticut has now recognized the Guntown area, because the Guntown Passive Park and Nature Preserve is now on the Freedom Trail of the state of Connecticut. And that's one of the reasons why.
Well, what I loved about your book was how you connected the old with how Guntown evolved to be passive open space, right up to the present of what's going on in my own town of Oxford.
Right. We got to do that. Let me take you first to just above the colonies, into the Acadia region of Canada. This would be present-day New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, Cape Breton Island, in that area. In 1755, the British had defeated the French. Another one of those imperial conflicts that the Americans got drawn into. So the British came into the Acadia region and talked to the Acadians and said to them, look, all right, we've won now, and now you've got to pledge your loyalty to the King of England. Well, the Acadians said, no, we're tired of being dragged into your imperial wars. We don't want any part of that. So the British said, well, that's too bad, because that means you're going to have to get out of here. And the British actually pulled up ships, put them on ships to bring them out. The British were going to bring in more colonists, you see, themselves. And other Canadians made their way down into New England and into our area. Now, that's very important, because that gives you an idea of the type of mindset that was beginning to set in, even in our own colonies. That we had tired of being pulled into the imperial adventures of Great Britain and France and some of the other colonial powers. For example, right here in Connecticut, you could be walking along the wharfs in New Haven, and someone in the British Royal Navy could grab you and say, okay, you're now in the British Royal Navy.
Just like that.
Just like that. It was called impressment. What it was really is like a primitive draft. If you think of our period. But people were tired of those policies. They didn't want to be, it wasn't just taxes, as I think was drummed into us
Taxation without
representation. That was
Yeah.
important. But there were all these other issues that come into play. So, again, the whole atmosphere, starting in 1750s, 1760s, there was a revolutionary fervent in the colonies, including right here in the Naugatuck Valley.
So that started way before 1776.
Way before 1776. And it's really interesting. One of the things, again, in researching this book, I found a letter from Jefferson to Adams way past everything in the 1800s, early 1800s. And he says, he says, a lot of people mistake the war for the revolution. And that was just an effect of the revolution. The revolution really started much earlier, 1760s, and really continued right into the 1790s. It's a very important period to make that distinction.
Now, now this occurs, the beginning of your book, after 1776,
Yes.
because now by this time we've declared our independence, so
Right.
now it's pretty contentious.
Right. So let's go right to Connecticut,
Okay.
right to the Naugatuck Valley, right?
Okay.
I want to take you and ask our viewers to come with me now to, we're going to go to March 11th, 1780, and right up the Naugatuck Valley is coming this insidious secret British agent. He's got no good intentions, that's for sure. He's been sent by the British military. Now, he comes to the Whittemore Inn in Seymour. It was called Shushtown back then.
Shushtown.
Shushtown.
In Seymour.
In Seymour, right. The Whittemore Inn, by the way, the building still stands.
Where is that?
I'm not sure.
Where?
I did see it at one point 15 years ago when I was
Okay.
researching.
The Whittemore
It
Inn.
is
In Seymour.
in Seymour, but of course it has different ownership now.
Right.
Actually, a motorcycle group occupied it. I think when I viewed it.
Out Main Street, maybe.
Maybe.
Yes.
And they actually still had the table and a little plaque saying, "This is where the British agent sat."
That came, the secret agent.
Right. So in comes this secret agent. Now, he's a big fellow. He's as wide as he is tall. He's got a big black cape on. He's got one of those colonial three-quarter hats on, big belt. He's got the air of the sea about him. But he is very much a secret British agent. Why is he at the inn? Now, he's at the inn for a number of reasons. Why would you go to an inn if you're a secret agent? Well, there was no Yahoo News. There was no Instagram. There was no emails and all these many ways that we get information. No TV shows. So he's at the inn to get information. Newspapers are sparse. There's one out of New Haven. There may be one kicking around the inn that he could take a look at. So he's there to pick up the news. And in particular, he'd like to bump into some Tory elements, because you got to realize Connecticut, there was civil struggle going on in here. Not everyone was for independence.
Right.
Not everyone was for forming a new republic. So even Washington, General Washington, before 1776, constantly tried to make appeals to England, saying, "Look, we'll work with you."
Right.
But of course, that all was, of course, rejected by King George. So anyway, here's the secret British agent in this inn, and sure enough, he bumps into some young fellows, and the Worcester cousins in particular. You may remember David Worcester.
David Worcester.
From Guntown. Henry Worcester was from Derby area.
Right.
They're cousins. And they're kind of like the leaders of the pack here. There's about a half a dozen young people. They're teenagers.
Impressionable youth.
Impressionable youth, right. And he sits down with them and realizes in talking to them that they're from loyalist families. Okay, so again, the idea that Connecticut, just like Oxford right now, just like Naugatuck right now, I know you're in a political campaign in Oxford,
Yes.
and everybody's doesn't have the same viewpoint.
No,
so,
that's for sure.
right. So he's sitting with them, and he realizes they're from loyalist families. And he, to make a longer story short, he talks them into becoming essentially a Tory gang. And he wants to raid the house of Captain Ebenezer Dayton. Now, why does he want to get a hold of Dayton? Well, Dayton has been functioning as a pirateer for the Continental Congress. He lives in Bethany.
Okay.
And he's been shooting across with his ship into Long Island Sound and into Long Island, pirating there and bringing the goods back to Connecticut.
Oh my goodness.
And in some cases, those goods actually were owned by people, you know, before the British took over. But he was bringing the goods back here, and the British wanted to get a hold of him. If they could kill him, they would kill him. It's that plain and simple. So the secret British agent, who, by the way, is also called Captain Graham.
Right.
Right. He rounds these Tories up into this gang, and they disperse to get more help. There's a Massa Scott, Jesse Cady,
Yes.
from Guntown area. There's Sam Doolittle, one of my favorite names.
Yes, yes.
Sam Doolittle is from the Litchfield area. But they're going out to try to get more troops for this raid. And sure enough, on March 15, 1780, they pull it off. At late night, they raid the Dayton house. By the way, which still stands.
Oh, the Dayton house is there,
Still
yeah.
stands in Bethany, right? And very nicely renovated and kept in the colonial, how would you say, decor or aspect. Anyway, they raid the house. They go through the windows, through the door. Luckily, Captain Ebenezer Dayton is away on business, so they can't get their hands on him. But unfortunately, they terrorize Mrs. Dayton, the children, 2 black servants that are there. And I'm calling them servants. I haven't been able to ascertain if they were slaves or
Paid people.
or actually, you know, servants, the way we think of servants in the modern era. We'll see. That's still, we'll find out. But anyway, at one point, Mrs. Dayton says, well, look, I want to go to my room, get out of my nightgown, and Captain Graham lets her do that. But when he lets her do that, she throws open the sash, sticks her head out the window, and starts screaming for help. When Graham hears that, he busts into the bedroom, grabs her by the hair, drags her across the floor, sits her down, and said, "Not another word, or we're gonna put a bayonet on you. And if you say another word, you're gonna get run through." So it's terrorizing.
Yeah.
We talk about terrorists these days.
Yeah.
This was a terrorist undertaking, right here in the Naugatuck
here.
Valley.
Right here.
Right. So in the meantime, the Tory gang, the Worcesters and the others, they have big sacks and they're gathering silver and gold and anything else they can get their hands on.
Pillaging. Yeah.
Right, pillaging, and they make their way out of the house. Now, very important point in the story. Which way are they going to go? Common sense would be, since Long Island and New York are British held, is to go south toward Derby Landing, down to Housatonic, and get out of here. But Graham, smart guy, he's listened to these folks from Guntown and realized that the Guntown area, again, has different names back then. He realized that the Guntown area would be a good place to go. They could get housing there, they can get food, get sustenance in various ways. So he says, look, we're going to go north into Waterbury, take a hard left west and go into the Guntown area, which is now Naugatuck, but then included parts of Middlebury and Oxford, and we'll be safe there and can find out what's going on. And that's what they do, to throw off any rebel trackers. And rebel trackers are coming. This is a very important point. Why was Connecticut not inundated with the British as other places were? They were well organized. They had militia. They had what were called vigilance committees. This is something we didn't hear much about when we studied histories, but these groups in our towns, in Bethany and in other places, they would keep an eye on the businesses and make sure they weren't trading with England, making sure they weren't trading with the colonies that were controlled by England. So no sugar, no ink from the colonies, things like that. They kept an eye on the blacksmiths, make sure they weren't using metals that came from England, that type of thing. So it was quite a job, but they were well organized.
Yeah, but it kind of sounds like a terrorism in another way. You know, what I'm trying to say is the others didn't agree, and now they're being, it's unbelievable when there's civil.
Well, civil strife.
Civil strife, yeah.
Right, and it gets worse, as you know.
Yes.
So And there also were the committees of defense and correspondence, and these were the more political groups. You would have been a member of this, Catherine.
I would. Oh.
Absolutely. They were the ones that kept an eye on the political things and kept communications between towns and, and colonies on what the British were doing and what should be done in the Continental Congress.
Right.
So out of all that organization, within a couple hours in Bethany, there was rebel trackers were put together, and they're going to track down this British agent and his Tory gang.
So now what's the gang do? The gang goes on.
The gang is now making its way into Guntown. The rebel trackers, thrown off a little at first, but they were smart enough to send some people south, some people west, some people north, and they realize, they see the tracks going north, and are able to figure it out. Okay, this gang is heading, into Greater Waterbury, which was called back then, and then probably into Guntown, because they know a lot of loyalists are there. And they began to pick up on some of the names. They were silly enough, actually, when they raided the house, to use some of the actual names.
Oh.
And of course, remember, it's a very sparse population back then, so even using first names in many towns.
Everybody knew each other.
In a sense, even though far apart in another sense, but a lot of people knew each other. So the chase is on. And this is what I mean when I say it's almost like a James Bond chase scene going through the valley.
Without the fancy sports cars.
Without all the rest and the fancy weapons. In fact, the Tory gang is carrying halberds. Are you familiar with a halberd is?
Well, I had to look that up when I was reading. It's a wooden handled thing with a spike and a axe on it or something like that.
Right, it has like a hatchet with a spear at the top.
Yeah.
Right, kind of a medieval carryover from medieval times.
Yeah.
They were carrying those as well as guns.
Right.
Those single-shot guns that they carried then. So to continue the story, another critical point happens where this gang is in Guntown. We have to introduce another character. In fact, it's the character that I like to use to tell the story when I wrote Hurry Down Guntown. His name is Chauncey Judd.
Chauncey Judd,
Chauncey Judd. And Chauncey Judd,
Poor Chauncey.
The backstory is very important. The Judd family, very different from this Tory gang. The Judd family is ardent supporters of independence and the Revolution. No doubt about it. Okay? In fact, his father, Isaac Judd, was one of the first members of the school committee in what was then becomes called Salem and Salem Bridge. It goes under different names, becomes Naugatuck. So he was an advanced thinker, if you think about it. I mean, a school. They start a library early on. Yeah. So anyway, Chauncey Judd, we have to talk a little about him. That same night, March 15, 1780, he's at a quilting. Now, a quilting is like, what would that be called now in modern days?
Well, I guess quilting, because people make, I think they still call it quilting. They do it at the senior center and all.
But it was different back then, though. A quilting back then was a wedding party.
Oh, I see. This is just making quilts is what they did.
Right. What they did is,
times.
for months, they were making quilts to get ready for this wedding. And just before the wedding, they have this quilting where they put all the pieces together. Different people come.
Memories, yeah.
Right, and they put it together. And it's a festive thing. The women are putting the quilt together, but they invite the guys. So it's kind of like not a bachelor party. What would it be called? They have them now. It's combined.
A Jack and Jill.
Jack and Jill party. There you go. Okay. So they're having their kind of Jack and Jill party. And there'll be a fiddler there and that type of thing. So Chauncey's there, and his favorite, Deetha Webb, is there. So there's this party, and they're playing games and everything, and dancing. And at the end, the idea is, if you're sweet on someone, the guy goes up and tells the woman he will squire them home, is the word they would use. So sure enough, Chauncey screws up his courage, and he asks Deetha Webb if he could squire her home, and she says yes. And off they go. And Chauncey gets his first kiss goodnight at the door. There's more that goes on there. But anyway, he leaves with a bliss, to say the least. He's about 16 years old.
Okay.
And what's very important is he knows people in this Tory gang because they're all from that Guntown area or
Sure.
close to that Guntown area. So he's walking along, and what happens? Sure enough, bam, he runs right into this Tory gang and the British secret agent.
A perfect example of when your luck is just when you think things are going beautifully, terror strikes.
Exactly. So they bump into each other, and there's recognition. And what can't this British agent allow to happen now that they've bumped into this young fellow?
He can't go anywhere.
He can't allow that boy to leave because he knows the other boys there. He knows their loyalist background. He sees the big sacks. He just knows, or pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So he tries to get out of there, but the British agent won't let him. They essentially, in modern terms, kidnap him.
Right.
So now this Tory gang's going into Guntown, and they've got this young fellow in tow. The rebel trackers are making their way down into the what we call Naugatuck now, come across the Naugatuck River. They meet up with a member of the Judd family who, after a while in the morning, realize Chauncey's not home. They're out looking for him. But with members of the family out looking for him, there's rebel trackers coming in. They bump into each other. There's a realization, uh-oh, this kid's not home. There's a good chance, he's been grabbed.
Right.
Because he would have been right on the path of these people.
Mm-hmm.
So now the chase is joined now by the Judd family. They get more recruits. And you got this rebel trackers again on their way. In the meantime, the Tories have reached the home, another favorite name of mine, of Joba Magun.
Joba Magun.
Joba Magun.
Here comes the word gun.
Right. The Gun family, longtime name in Guntown, starting back in the 1730s. In fact, we were talking about slavery before. Enos Gun had slaves. This is the older brother of Joba Magun. And in fact, when I was doing the research for this book, I came across the ad in the paper where Enos Gun was looking for his slave, Robin, a 27-year-old escaped slave.
Mm-hmm.
And he was offering essentially $10 for his.
A lot of money then.
Back. A lot of money back then. So it's a good chance that Joba Magun, his younger brother, also had slaves. I haven't been able to confirm that directly, but as you know from your background in science, Catherine,
Mm-hmm.
you put the data together, you look at it and you say, and Joba Magun, by the way, is the richest man in Guntown.
I would imagine he owned a huge piece of property.
He
did
owned
he not?
a good chunk of land, and good chance that he had slaves or invested in slavery.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that period, you could have, for example, you can go right up to Boston and get stocks in a slave ship. So he could have owned stocks in a slave ship.
I see that went back and forth,
Right.
sold the slaves.
He could have had stocks in an insurance company in Hartford that were insuring the ships.
Mm-hmm.
So again, a lot of people in Connecticut, more than we would think, and in the North, had their fingers into slavery. That's a very important backstory, or maybe even forestory.
Well, we
on
talk about
this.
the Armistice. Yeah, that came into the
Exactly,
ports. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that happens in the 1830s, I think
Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
Yeah, a little bit later.
Yeah.
Okay, so long story short, they go to Joba Magun because they realize he could give them sustenance, a place to rest, and he does. Joba Magun lets them sleep in the barn. He's a little leery of them, though, because remember, he's the richest guy in Guntown. And the Continental Congress holds sway where he lives generally, even though Guntown is a loyalist stronghold. He's a little worried.
Sure.
He sees the big sacks. He could be implicated.
Mm-hmm.
He could end up in the Newgate prison, the first federal prison
Sure.
up in what's now East Granby. So he says, okay, stay in the barn, but when early morning, get out of here. Okay, so he lets them stay there. Interestingly, in the early morning, Joba Magun gets out of there because he doesn't want to be anywhere near them because he's afraid of being.
He's taking no chances.
He's taking no chances. He doesn't want to be implicated. So the next morning, the gang of Tory terrorists get up and they get some chow from inside the house. They take off, Interestingly, right into where the Guntown Passive Park and Nature Preserve is today. They went right through that area. They go down to Long Meadow Brook. Okay, you're probably familiar with Long Meadow.
Yes, yes.
Starts up this way and makes its way through Naugatuck to the Naugatuck River. And they go down by the Naugatuck River. They decide to send David Worcester to his household to pick up any news, if anything's going on now that we're into the daylight. So he goes off there, David Worcester. The main gang stays down by Long Meadow Brook. And at this point, Graham says, okay, this kid's a problem. He's holding us up. We can't let him go. We're going to kill him. So sure enough, just like you see on the front page of the book.
Yes, the book.
Right, that Graham decides, all right, Chauncey, this is it. He puts him on his knees. He puts his queen's gun on him and says, we're going to count down. He starts counting down. He says, say your prayers. He starts counting down. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. At some point, he turns Chauncey around, puts the gun at the nape of his neck, cocks the gun. Henry Worcester at this time is thinking, right? I mean, he grew up with Chauncey Judd. He hates the Judds. He hates what they stand for, but he knows this kid.
Yeah.
His humanity comes out.
Yeah.
He puts his hand in front of the gun and says, Captain, I didn't sign up for this.
Right.
Okay? Captain Graham says, get your hand out of the way or I'll blow it off. Henry Worcester is a smart kid. He takes his hand away.
Yes.
Okay. Graham continues counting. 3, 2, 1. Luckily, David Worcester comes out of the bushes, jumps in front of the gun entirely and says, no, Captain, we didn't sign on for this. I know this boy. I did the huskings with him, harvesting with him. You can't do this. We didn't sign on for a killing. Let's just get out of here. Captain Graham at this point gets real angry. He uncocks the gun. He calls them every name you could think of. You milksops is one of the idioms they used back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is very important. They quit then. They go off. They're headed to the Worcester household now to, again, get more sustenance and find out what's going on. They're following David Worcester. But Captain Graham knows he's in big trouble because anyone involved in the military would know they're in big trouble. Why? Why is that gang in trouble?
Because they're not listening like soldiers should.
Right, to the leader.
To the leader.
He's lost command and control. How many times have we heard that on TV? He's losing command and control. He's in trouble. And he's in big trouble because that rebel trackers are coming. They go to the Worcester household. And this is real interesting. Graham again decides to kill the kid. While they're celebrating upstairs, Mrs. Worcester is pulling the goods out. She's a loyalist, remember. She pulls out a nice hand warmer and says, oh, this will be great at church on Sunday. Thank you, Captain Dayton, who they stole it from, right? Remember, the goods came.
She's taking
She's
someone
celebrating.
else. Okay.
She's celebrating. You got to remember, these are loyalists. Okay?
Boy, it kind of reminds me of Ebenezer Scrooge when the woman grabbed his bedding. Anyway.
Right. But in the meantime, Captain Graham again grabs Chauncey Judd, brings him down to what they call the milk room. They had milk rooms back then with a big well in it. Sometimes they were outside the houses. This one was inside. By the way, the Worcester household still stands.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's in Middlebury now.
It's in Middlebury now.
Right. So Graham brings him down there, separate from the group, puts a gun on Chauncey, says to one of his sidekicks, we're going to kill him and throw him down the well. And they won't, get rid of the evidence. Counts down again. He's got the gun on Chauncey. Chauncey screws up his courage enough to yell up, David, Henry, he's going to kill me, And they all run down to the milk room. Graham will not pay attention to Henry and David anymore. He's going to kill him. But Mrs. Worcester jumps in front of the gun of Captain Graham and says, I don't care for the Judd family. I hate what they stand for, but I know his mother.
Oh, well.
End of case.
This I understand.
Right.
Being a mother myself.
Right. He says, you're not going to touch a hair on this kid's head, and we'll make sure you won't get out of here. That's what she says to him, So he again uncocks the gun. not sure what to do. In the meantime, one of the Tory gang looks out the window and says, "Oh my gosh, the rebel trackers are here. They're coming up the path.
They're after Chauncey.
They're after that rebel.
Yeah, they want to get Chauncey back.
And they want to get that Tory gang.
Right.
And they want to get that British agent. So at this point, they jump out the windows and the doors of the Worcester homestead and make their way up to probably the area near where the bridle path is these days, if people want to relate to it.
Is that the same one that goes through Southbury and all through?
Through Oxford?
Oh, I used to ride. I've been on that bridle path.
Okay, very good. So off they go. And if I may, what I'd like to do is read a couple of pages from Hurry Down Guntown, because it gives you a feeling for just what it would have been like.
Oh, please do. Oh, it's not the author reading his own words. I love that.
Okay, and we'll try to avoid the book talk thing where the person reads on and on and on.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
I'm going to read just 2 pages.
Okay, that's great.
That'll do it. I'm going to parachute you and our viewers into Chapter 9, Into the Forest.
Okay.
And you're hearing Chauncey Judd.
Okay.
Furious was the pace of the running. It became part of us, like breathing. Not to do it would have seemed odd and dangerous. It was as if the Grim Reaper himself was in our pursuit. Of course, my situation was more perplexing. The threat emanated from my running mates. If I could no longer run, death would quickly follow. To run was to stay alive. I ran. The running was complicated by 2 acts of nature, one from thousands of years ago and one from the previous autumn. The land in back of the Worcester farm shot straight uphill. With no road or even a trail through the forest, this meant the Tory band and their captive were bushwhacking with rebel pursuers just minutes behind. Unlike the forest in the relatively flat valley, the angle of the incline allowed more light to penetrate the earth's surface. Thus, there were many more vines, shrubs, and seedlings to entangle one's foot, particularly the feet of those who were leg bailing. A problem of more immediacy was the fallen leaves of the previous autumn. They were made slippery, not only due to the incline, but also by the recent wet, late winter snow. Under lighter circumstances, the occasional "whoa," quickly followed by a body spread out over the forest floor, would have elicited a riotous chorus from one's friends. Excuse me, but not here. The stakes were too high, namely, men's lives. Chauncey immediately realized how he could help himself. Feigning a fall or an injury would slow the Tory gang and allow the rebel trackers to gain ground. He well knew that if he dallied too long with such a ploy, a royal bullet from the captain's gun would surely find him. Unfortunately, even his unintentional flops brought a sure blow from Martin, who seemed to enjoy his job of caring for Chauncey. He would have to find another way to slow the desperate band down. But how? Get leg bailing, you little reb swine, or I'll send this here halberd right up your behind. I didn't mean that to rhyme, but it does. Chauncey sensed the desperation in Martin's rebuke. He knew its source. Even almost out of breath, he felt certain elation from the shouts of the horses and grunts some 15 to 20 rods behind. That's very close. Help was closer than he could ever have imagined, especially considering the events in the dairy room of the Worcester's home just minutes before. I'm going as fast as me legs will allow. Just as he finished uttering his plea, Chauncey felt a blow to the middle of his back. It would have easily have knocked him to the ground, except the perpetrator simultaneously grabbed him and twisted his shirt and lifted him off the ground. As he hung there as if by a hay baler's hook, he was able to turn his head just enough to see the beet-red face of his tormentor just inches away. "Judd, you thick-headed gilly, just keep pace or I'm trying. Before young Joe could finish his plea, Martin, the part of the Tory gang, twisted the back of his shirt, elevating Chauncey still further off the ground. "That's Mr. Martin, sir, when you're addressing me, boy." Hearing the dialogue between Chauncey and Martin, Captain Graham, at the head of the scrambling group, turned around, pointed to Chauncey, and declared in a low, menacing voice, "Not a word from him, Martin. He'll have the trackers down us in a hair's breadth." Just before resuming the charge up a steep embankment, Graham glared at David Worcester. Now, why would he be glaring at David Worcester?
Well, David Worcester spoiled his plans.
Sure.
Pretty much so, hasn't he?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Matter of fact, it's almost all over. It was all over the moment
Right.
David Worcester put his
body in front of the
yes,
gun.
and now, as you pointed out, Graham is no longer in control.
Right. Command and control is waning.
Mm-hmm.
So at this point, they're running down the path. Rebel trackers are coming. There is no trail, so it is harder for the rebel trackers to actually pinpoint where they are, and distance is becoming greater. The Tory group makes their way to what's called Torys Den, or Dayton's Den. It goes by a number of different names, but they do stay there for a little while. And they stick Chauncey in the crevice in the rocks there, right off the present-day bridle path.
Which you say is still there. You
It's
feel
still-
that that's the...
I'm pretty sure we found it. In fact, one day I took my sons about 10, 15 years ago maybe. They were young. And we were walking down the bridle path on one of those great nights where you have that nice full moon like we had last
right,
night.
yes,
You don't even need a flashlight
right,
on the bridle path.
right.
We walked down and we found it. And I couldn't fit in it. I tried to get my kids to fit in it. They were a little spooked by it, though. They didn't stay in there too long. But a young person could fit in there. So it's
Yeah.
actually still there. You could ride along the bridle path. And I think at that point it may be Oxford. I'm not sure. Right on
In the Oxford side.
Naugatuck border. Yeah,
Oh,
right.
We're famous for so many
For
things.
so many things
Yeah.
here. Right, right.
Yeah.
Especially at the grassroots, just
At the
like
grass-
just like your campaign, Catherine. Right at the grassroots.
At the grassroots, and,
Right.
and as long as you bring that up, it kind of segues into, I guess Chauncey is retrieved.
Right, we can make it shorter here. He makes his way out of there, goes down the valley. I'll try to do this in as quick a time as I can. They go into what would be present-day Ansonia, in Derby, cross over there, steal a whaleboat, start making their way down the Housatonic.
Right.
Meantime, the rebel trackers made their way into Derby Landing. Very important point. Derby Landing was a deep water port back then.
Wow.
Slaves were brought in up the Housatonic to Derby Landing.
Now, exactly where's I was born and raised in Derby. Where's Derby Landing?
You know, with
It
the
could be.
research I was able to do, and more has to be done, it seemed to me it would be near the confluence of the Naugatuck and the Housatonic River.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not totally sure.
Right. Okay.
But I would think it's around there.
Okay.
So anyway, there goes the Tory gang down the Housatonic. The rebel trackers come in, and they're up on horseback at this point, going along the bank. And they stop along the bank to take respite at an inn. And interestingly, they don't realize that they actually got ahead of the Tory gang.
Oh no.
And while they're up there drinking
Wow.
their ale and taking a break, they're looking down at the river, and there goes the Tory gang.
Oh, right under their noses.
Right under their noses. And of course, they drop everything, jump back on their horses, get down to the end of the Housatonic eventually, and they're very close. They could actually see each other. And of course, the rebels, trackers, they have guns. They could be shooting at them, but they can't. Why can't they shoot at them?
Won't go that far.
Well, they're that close. They actually can.
They can't. Now why
They
would?
can't shoot at them.
Because Chauncey.
Right, exactly right, exactly right.
They'll kill Chauncey
Well,
immediately.
by accident, possibly.
Or by accident.
Right,
yeah.
right. What would that be? Collateral damage nowadays?
Collateral
or
damage
whatever they call
nowadays.
it now, right. So off the boat goes through those gray, steely waters of Long Island Sound over to Long Island. But the rebel trackers don't quit. To make a long story short, they reorganize. They get more reinforcements from Derby.
Oh.
They come back down. They go across with boats. They find out that the Tories are held up at Bailey's Inn on Long Island. They land 3 miles away. They hike over there. Now, think of the courage now. And this was one of the reasons I wrote this book. Think of the courage of these people. They're
Great
in
courage.
British-held Long Island.
They're right in the British camp.
British man of war going back and forth on Long Island Sound. And they're on British-held Long Island, on the land, actually, at this point. They raid Bailey's Inn. They get a hold of Chauncey, free him. They grab the British secret agent and the Tory band and bring them all back to trial. Just absolutely amazing.
And you know, one part of that, and we'll go into the next segment of the book,
Sure,
because
sure.
that's how it ties into
Right,
now.
right.
But I love the part where he's trying to navigate Graham, the boat.
Right.
Okay. And he is using for a sail one of the
Mrs.
Dayton's
yeah.
dress.
Right, right.
But Mrs. Dayton's dress does not cooperate,
No,
as
no,
Mrs.
no.
Dayton would have not
They get blown over with it. Yeah.
Yeah,
it doesn't
and the
quite work.
dress ends up on his head and everything. I love that
Yeah,
part.
yeah. It's really quite
Yeah,
comical.
she Mrs. Dayton attacks him. If she
Right.
can't attack him physically, her
Right.
dress did.
Right, and as you know, even in intense civil struggle times, or like the campaign right now you're in, and
Yep.
all of us involved trying to stop this dirty fossil fuel power
That's
plant.
right.
You got to find moments of
Humor, yes,
humor
yes.
in the human comedy.
And in many ways, I liken the struggle that we're doing in Oxford to the struggle then.
Absolutely.
And now, a question here.
Sure.
Can you tell us what Hurry Down Guntown is about, which you did?
Right.
At least the first part of it.
Sure.
And then, why did you write this book, as there is an earlier book that tells the same story?
Sure. I think I've already given hints at it. Well, first of all, the book, a wonderful book, by the way. If you like reading colonial reading, which is a little different, Israel Warren wrote the original book, and it's called Chauncey Judd. I put a totally different emphasis. I put the emphasis on the rally cry, just as we have the rally cry now to stop this dirty fossil fuel power plant, the rally cry of getting down to Guntown. Because that same rally cry was used in the 1990s into the new millennium to get down to Guntown to stop the plowing and paving of that land. In fact, I'm fortunate enough to have my older son is a real deal historian.
Oh.
We're into biology, as you know,
Right.
with our background, Catherine, but he's
Yes.
the real deal. And the way he calls this, he says the historic memory of the incident which we just went through in the colonial period helped save the land.
It plays out.
It's still, that's the impact of what I'm calling the most important event in Naugatuck history.
Now, I'm going to move you along a little because
Sure.
of our time frame, but what I
Sure.
would say is that from reading your book and seeing
Sure.
that to save that land
Right.
was no easy matter. It encompassed at least a decade, didn't it? It was many
More.
years, more than a decade,
Right.
through different politicians, through
Right.
different people who saw things differently.
Right.
And one of the things you said, that you quoted someone else, it was the fact that you didn't give up. You
Right.
kept at it and
Right.
kept at it and kept at it. And I have found in my life with politicians and with the powers that be, you have to keep pushing and
Sure.
pushing, which brings us to tell us how you finally were. It was very quick. We have 10 minutes. I'm sorry.
Okay.
How you salvaged that land. And how it kind of ties in with what's going on with this fossil fuel plant in Oxford right now.
And I just wanted to spell this. I didn't salvage the land. What's very important was the grassroots.
The grassroots, that's good.
It really
how
was.
grassroots people did that.
There really was some wonderful young women. They were high schoolers.
Yep.
Vanessa Govea, who was, I think, 15, 16 years old at the time, she becomes the chairman of the Committee for a Cultural Environmental Center, Guntown Road. Casey Niddle. It was really a Girl Scout troop.
Right.
And they brought their Girl Scout leader, Maria Folsom, the adult, along with them.
Right.
And that's how this committee formed.
Right.
So it was really, they were the core of that committee, very much for years. There were others from Naugatuck, in fact, right on the Naugatuck Oxford border. Melissa Loenard was chair for a while. And right now, Michael Turman is chair of the Guntown group. We still exist, even though the land has been, is a passive park and nature preserve. Interestingly, he's African American, which connects all the way back to Tobiah. We unfortunately didn't have a chance to do that.
Oh,
but
yeah, Tobiah actually was willing to give up his life and his family
Sure.
to save, he was another one that saved Chauncey.
In Oxford, right, just
In
an
Oxford.
addendum. We'll do an addendum here. At the Oxford Inn, it was Tobiah that actually turned a gun on that Tory gang. And
Yeah, I think that's an important part. I know why we were running out of time, but Tobiah really, right at the Oxford House, wasn't it?
right, and turned a gun on relatives of his master. I mean, could you imagine
To
the courage?
save a young white boy. Yes,
do that, yeah.
We can't say enough about Tobiah, and and that. So now we get to this point where through the years, through Rado and politicians who were only interested in winning the next election, as they usually are, were ignoring this. But finally, you had light at the end of the tunnel.
Right, we did. And because the movement continued, that was the important thing. As you say, the persistence continued. Finally, we have to give credit to Bobby Mezzo, ran as actually outside of the Democratic Committee in Naugatuck and won his election. But in the process of that election campaign, he pledged support to, if he got elected, he would help save and preserve that passive open space. Passive open space means land with no impermeable surfaces, no hard surfaces. That's very important because passive open space is lands where carbon is taken in.
Right.
It mitigates climate change.
Right.
The exact opposite of what, of course, a dirty fossil fuel power plant does.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So now we have this beautiful open space in Guntown.
Right.
This is partly my fault because the story about Chauncey Judd was so great that people need to know the roots.
Right.
So now we bring it up to modern day.
Sure.
15 years ago, this power plant loomed its ugly head over Oxford.
And Naugatuck.
And Naugatuck, that's right.
And Middlebury.
And Middlebury, and actually Southbury, which is not, I guess their first selectman is not too concerned, but.
And parts of Waterbury. It's a 10-mile, more
it's
than
a 10-mile
radius.
Okay, so here it comes, and it's been fought and fought and fought. It's been stalled for whatever reason, the economy, whatever. And here we are again, grassroots. Grassroots people. And the interesting thing about it, Len, is that the very people that wanted to sell on the zoning board to Wannakill were the very people that also wanted the golf course community seeing a pot of gold in either spot and never realizing that they were going to that those people were not going to take living in the shadow of that power plant and the rest of Oxford. But anyway, I digressed and I didn't mean to.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
But we're right back to where we are today with
Right. Let me add a little too. I think it's very important, that what came together to save the park also has come together to try to prevent this dirty fossil fuel power plant.
The same thing.
Right. Some of the same people. Now, that grassroots group and some river groups, the Naugatuck River Revival Group has been very important, the Naugatuck Land Trust, the Guntown Group certainly. We've formed a network called the Naugatuck Environmental Network, and the Western Connecticut Central Labor Council has supported us in battling, and all of us really, including the Greens in Oxford and the whole coalition, in fighting this dirty fossil fuel power plant. They recognized, labor leadership recognized its importance. Unfortunately, there are backward elements in everything, and there was some backward leadership in certain unions that the company that tends to profit big time from this power plant and the hedge fund behind them mobilized some backward elements in the trade union element, and they kept invading our meetings. Not only in Oxford, also in Naugatuck.
Right. And CPV has actually gotten involved in our election in Oxford this year. They've spent their own money to tout the power plant and actually prop up Temple.
So it's that type of thing. And now we even have talk about, the problems with politicians that say one thing and then do another. Here we have Bobby Mezzo, who supported the environment, has been very good on land at least, has turned around and supports the dirty fossil fuel power plant in another town.
Well, and you see, this brings me to this. I can't let you go until I ask you this question.
Right.
There are people that no matter what you say or do, do not want to believe that this is a health risk. And of course, will never believe that it's a health risk to them. I mean, if they figure they live far enough away or this or that, but they don't really believe that people like you are not exaggerating.
Right.
Now
Let me give you one piece of data.
Okay.
And we're both involved in science, so we know the
We have
importance.
1 minute.
The American Medical Association, in a study in the beginning of the new millennium, said that if you had 10 micrograms of what we call soot, particulate matter, into the atmosphere that adds already to what's there, all right, it goes out in that 10-mile radius we talk about, you will get an increase, an 8% increase of lung cancer in those areas. Okay?
We had an
This is
oncologist
the
say
American
that.
Medical Association.
Yes, an oncologist got up at the DEEP meeting and the Siting Council meeting, and he said that. And my comment to both those places, the DEP, was, I don't believe your parameters that were given to you. I believe the oncologist.
Right, right. And that's 10 micrometers per cubic meter of air, by the way.
Well, Len, we have to wrap it up. I'm sorry.
But
it
we
went
had fun, though.
We had fun. It went too fast. We could do another show on this.
Right.
Len, thank you very, very, very
Sure,
much for
sure,
coming.
sure.
And can we have a shot of Len's book before we go out, or is it too late for that? I highly recommend Hurry Down Guntown. It was a great read. I read it in less than 2 days, and I had fun reading it. So I'll just tell you that. Well, I guess that wraps us up. I'm going to say to everybody out there, have a good evening and a better tomorrow. Thank you, Len.
Thank you, Kathy.
All right.
Yeah.
Take care.